The infertile CEO had a one-night stand with beautiful girl, and she got pregnant with 4 babies. Hi, my beautiful reader, and welcome to Mr. Peter's Stories. Before we begin, let's take a moment to reflect. Dear Heavenly Father, I ask you to bless my dear friend who is listening right now. Fill their heart with peace, their mind with clarity, and their spirit with joy. May they feel your love surrounding them and know they are cherished and never alone. Amen. In our last video, your heartfelt responses moved me beyond words. Reading your comments filled me with gratitude and reminded me how blessed I am to have a family like you, a family more precious than the rarest gem. Your kindness and love inspire me every day. Tell me, how did the last story make you feel? Did it touch your heart as your words touch mine? Now let's begin a new chapter together, a story of love, destiny, and the beauty of life's unexpected moments. The Seattle Space Needle's observation deck glittered 300 feet above the city, a crown of light and glass that had witnessed countless celebrations. But on this particular evening, as Seattle's elite gathered to celebrate Dale Boucher's 40th birthday, the iconic structure would bear witness to something far darker. Betrayal. Dale stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, an untouched glass of Dom Perignon in his hand, watching his reflection overlap with the city lights below. At 40, he cut an impressive figure, 6'2", with shoulders that filled out his custom Tom Ford suit with athletic grace and silver threading tastefully through his dark hair at the temples. Forbes had once called him the most eligible bachelor in the Pacific Northwest, a title that made him wince every time someone mentioned it. They didn't know about the fertility specialists, the failed treatments, or the nights he spent staring at nursery websites, imagining rooms he might never need. The party swirled around him in full swing, Seattle's business elite mingling with his board members and top executives from Premier Technologies, the company he'd built from a startup in his garage to a multi-billion-dollar medical technology empire, now employed over 10,000 people. Their latest innovations in non-invasive surgical equipment were saving lives across the globe. It should have been a night of triumph. Another amazing year, Dale. Richard Chen, his CFO, raised a glass as he passed. The Q4 projections are looking better than ever. Dale nodded, his practiced smile sliding into place. Richard had been with him since the beginning, when they worked 80-hour weeks, fueled by nothing but instant ramen and dreams. Now, Richard wore Italian leather shoes and had 3 kids in private school. The thought sent a familiar ache through Dale's chest. The city lights blurred as he remembered his last doctor's appointment. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's voice, gentle but clinical. The latest treatment wasn't successful, Mr. Boucher. Given your specific condition, I think we need to discuss other options. He'd sat there in her office, surrounded by photos of the families she'd helped create, feeling like the last man on earth. A burst of laughter drew his attention to the bar, where Marcus Wellington held court among a group of investors. Wellington, CEO of Meridian Medical, Premier's biggest competitor, hadn't been invited. His presence set off warning bells in Dale's mind, but confronting him would cause a scene. Besides, several board members seemed quite comfortable with Wellington's impromptu appearance. Wellington caught his eye and raised his glass in a mock toast. The man was everything Dale wasn't. Old money, Yale legacy, third-generation CEO. He'd inherited his company. Dale had built his from nothing. Their rivalry had filled business papers for years, but lately, Wellington's attacks had become more personal. Dale! Jennifer Morris, his head of PR, appeared at his elbow. Her smile was too bright, her eyes worried. Channel 7 wants a statement about the rumors. What rumors? The champagne in his hand suddenly felt too warm. They're saying Meridian is making a play for controlling interest in Premier. Something about private stock sales. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Social media is already picking it up. The glass shattered in Dale's grip before he even realized he'd tightened his hand. Champagne and blood mixed on the imported marble floor. Conversations stuttered to a halt as heads turned toward the sound. Mr. Boucher. One of the waitstaff hurried over with a towel. Dale barely noticed the sting of the cuts. Through the growing whispers, Wellington's voice carried clearly, "Careful there, Dale." Getting blood on the floors. Very unseemly for a man of your position. The pause was deliberate, the smirk evident in his tone. Though I suppose a man who can't create a legacy doesn't deserve to run a legacy company. The words hit like physical blows. Dale's private struggles with infertility had been leaked to Wellington somehow. The knowledge he'd tried so desperately to protect was now a weapon in his rival's hands. Looking around the room, Dale saw it in their faces, his board members, his trusted advisors, the slight shifts in posture, the averted gazes. They'd sold him out. While he'd been building the company's future, they'd been secretly selling their shares to Wellington. Blood dripped from his palm, each drop a quiet counterpoint to his racing thoughts. The empire he'd built, the lives his company saved, the jobs he'd created, all of it balanced on a knife's edge because he couldn't do the one thing nature intended, pass on his genes. "Sir," his assistant appeared with the building's first aid kit. "Let me help." "Not now." Dale's voice was ice, his mind already racing through options. He'd need to call an emergency board meeting. His lawyers would have to review the shareholder agreements. The PR team would need to craft a response. But first, he turned to face Wellington, letting his bloody hand drip onto his own ruined suit. Let them see it. Let them see that he could bleed and still stand. "A legacy?" Dale's voice carried across the suddenly silent observation deck. "Let me tell you about legacy, Marcus. Legacy isn't about DNA. It's not about passing on shares or inheriting Daddy's company. Each word was precisely chosen, pitched to carry to every corner. Legacy is about impact. How many lives have your inherited patents saved this year? How many surgeons are using your equipment in developing countries? How many of your employees' children are attending college because of your stock options program?" He stepped forward, and despite the blood, despite the whispers, his presence filled the room. "You want to talk about creating things? I created hope for patients who had none. I created jobs for people who needed them. I created solutions to problems your R&D team said were impossible." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "And if you think you can take that away with some backroom deals and cheap shots about my personal life, you don't understand what the word legacy means." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the city below seemed to hold its breath. Wellington's smirk faltered for just a moment. Bold words from a man about to lose his company. "The board votes tomorrow, Dale. Maybe spend less time making speeches and more time counting your remaining shares." Dale looked at his bleeding hand, then at the faces around him, some guilty, some afraid, some calculating their next move. He'd built this company from nothing once. If necessary, he'd do it again. "Jennifer," he called to his PR head, pitching his voice to Carrie. "Call a press conference for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. And get me Dr. Amit Patel from the Bloomberg School of Public Health on the line tonight." He turned to Wellington. "You want to play hardball? Fine, but remember, I didn't inherit my fighting skills. I earned them." He strode toward the elevator, his bloody hand held high enough to ensure it would stain his custom suit. Let the photos hit social media. Let them see that Dale Boucher didn't hide his wounds. He wore them like battle flags. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Before stepping in, Dale turned back one last time. "Oh, and Marcus. Happy birthday to me." The doors closed on Wellington's reddening face, and Dale finally let his mask crack. Alone in the descending elevator, he watched drops of blood stain his birthday card from the board. Too many more years of success suddenly reading like a funeral notice. His phone buzzed. Dr. Patel accepting his call for later. Good. The world thought Dale Boucher was fighting to save his company tonight. They weren't entirely wrong. But as he pressed his bleeding hand against his chest, feeling his heart hammer against his palm, Dale knew he was fighting for something far more precious. The chance to prove that a man's worth wasn't measured by his ability to reproduce, but by his capacity to create change in the world. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Dale straightened his spine. His mother, before cancer took her too early, had always told him, "Steel isn't strong because it never breaks. It's strong because it can bend without shattering." Tonight he had bent. Tomorrow he would show them all what it meant to be forged in fire. As he stepped out into the Seattle night, rain beginning to fall like nature's own commentary on his 40th birthday, Dale made himself a promise. Whether he had children of his own or not, his legacy would be measured in the lives he touched, the changes he created, and the hope he built. And no one, not Marcus Wellington, not his traitorous board, not even his own body's limitations, would take that away from him. The city stretched before him, its lights blurred by rain and unshed tears. Somewhere in this vast maze of steel and dreams, his future was waiting. He just had to survive tonight to find it. Blood still dripping, heart still beating, Dale Boucher walked into the rain-soaked night, leaving his 40th birthday party behind and walking toward a destiny he couldn't yet imagine. One that would prove that the greatest legacies aren't inherited or even created. They're earned, one impossible victory at a time. And as the Space Needle disappeared into the mist behind him, Dale allowed himself a real smile for the first time that night. Tomorrow's battle would be legendary, and he was just getting started. The rain washed the blood from his hand, but his determination only grew stronger with each step. Sometimes, he realized, you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find what you truly need. He just didn't know yet that his greatest legacy wasn't waiting in a boardroom or a laboratory. It was waiting in a hospital nursery where fate and a tired nurse named Bethany Sweet were about to rewrite everything he thought he knew about power, legacy, and the true meaning of creating something miraculous. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight he had a war to plan, and Dale Boucher had never lost a war he chose to fight. Chapter 2. Angels in Scrubs. The resignation letter sat in Bethany Sweet's locker like a loaded gun. 3 drafts, each more diplomatic than the last, all saying the same thing. 15 years of pediatric nursing had hollowed her out. The latest version, printed on crisp white paper, waited beside her spare scrubs, and the family photo she couldn't bring herself to take down. Her parents on their last Christmas together before the car accident that left her and her twin sister in the foster system. Seattle Children's Hospital hummed around her at 2 a.m., that peculiar quiet that always felt more like held breath than peace. The pediatric intensive care unit's monitors created their usual symphony of beeps and alerts, a rhythm Bethany could interpret in her sleep. Tonight was supposed to be her last night shift. She'd already accepted a position at a private clinic, regular hours, better pay, no more watching children fight battles they couldn't possibly understand. Nurse Sweet. Amanda, one of the new residents, poked her head into the break room. "Your little fighter in 302 is asking for you, says he can't sleep without his special story." Bethany smiled despite her exhaustion. Tommy, age 6, recovering from his 3rd heart surgery. He'd memorized every word of Where the Wild Things Are, but insisted only she could read it properly. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes, Bethany said, reaching for her coffee. The resignation letter could wait another hour. She never made it to Tommy's room. The first code blue alert came at 2:17 a.m., then another, then another. Before the third one finished echoing through the halls, Bethany was running toward the emergency department, her coffee forgotten, her body moving on pure instinct. "School bus rolled on I-5, Dr. Patel announced as staff poured in from every direction. 20 children, ages 5 to 11. First ambulance is 3 minutes out. This is not a drill, people." The emergency department transformed like a creature waking from hibernation. Trauma bays were cleared, equipment was checked, blood was ordered. Bethany felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, her earlier exhaustion burning away in the face of immediate need. The first ambulance arrived with a sound like thunder. Paramedics burst through the doors with a stretcher that seemed too large for its tiny occupant. A girl, no more than 7, her blonde hair matted with blood, her Wonder Woman backpack still strapped to her chest. Multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding, BP dropping. The paramedic rattled off stats as they moved. "She's been asking for her mom." Bethany fell into step beside the stretcher, her hand finding the girl's. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Nurse Bethany. Can you tell me your name?" "Lucy," the child whispered through tears. "I want my mommy." "I know, honey. We're going to find her. Right now, I need you to be brave like Wonder Woman, okay? Can you do that for me?" Lucy's tiny fingers tightened around Bethany's as they wheeled her into Trauma Bay 1. And just like that, Bethany's world narrowed to this single point of contact. This one child, this one moment, this one battle. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of motion and desperate needs. More ambulances arrived, more children, more tears, more tiny hands reaching for comfort. Bethany moved from bed to bed, her skills on autopilot, while her heart broke and reformed with each new patient. At some point she found herself in Trauma Bay 3, helping to stabilize a boy with a collapsed lung. His dark eyes locked onto hers as Dr. Patel inserted the chest tube, and Bethany sang softly, an old lullaby her mother used to use, the one that always calmed the most frightened children. "You have a beautiful voice," a deep voice commented from behind her. Bethany turned, ready to ask whoever it was to leave the Trauma Bay, and found herself staring at Dale Boucher. The Dale Boucher, CEO of Premier Technologies, whose face she'd seen on countless magazine covers and news reports. He stood in the doorway wearing what had to be a bespoke suit, though it was rumpled now, and his right hand was bandaged. "Mr. Boucher, this is a restricted area," she started, but he held up his uninjured hand. "I know, I'm sorry. I was dropping off some equipment donations when I heard about the accident. I thought maybe I could help." There was something in his voice, a roughness, a vulnerability that made Bethany pause. The media painted him as a cold-hearted corporate titan, but the man before her looked lost, haunted even. Before she could respond, the boy on the bed whimpered. Instantly, Dale stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket pocket, a small stuffed dragon. "Hey there, warrior," he said softly, placing the dragon next to the boy's hand. "This is Blaze. He's very brave, just like you. Would you like to hear his story?" The boy nodded slightly, careful of his chest tube. And to Bethany's amazement, Dale Boucher, the billionaire CEO, pulled up a chair and began spinning a tale about a dragon who was afraid to fly until he learned that courage wasn't about not being scared. It was about flying anyway. Bethany found herself caught between monitoring her patient and watching this unexpected scene unfold. Dale's voice was gentle, his story simple but engaging. The boy's vital signs steadily improved as he listened, his small hand clutching the dragon. Over the next few hours, Dale moved from room to room, distributing stuffed animals and stories. He seemed to have an endless supply of both. Bethany kept crossing paths with him, each time noticing something new, the way his hands shook slightly when he touched the children's beds, The sadness in his eyes when he looked at the worried parents, the genuine warmth of his smile when a child hugged their new toy. At 3 a.m., she found him in the family waiting area, sitting with Lucy's mother, who had finally arrived. The woman was sobbing into her hands, and Dale was simply there, his presence somehow both powerful and gentle, offering silent support. "She's stable," Bethany announced, and watched both adults look up. "The surgery went well. She's asking for you, Mrs. Parker." As Lucy's mother rushed past to see her daughter, Dale stood, swaying slightly. Bethany noticed the shadows under his eyes, the way he favored his injured hand. "When did you last eat?" she asked, her nurse's instincts kicking in. He blinked, seemingly surprised by the question. "I don't remember." "Come on," she said, making a decision. "The cafeteria's closed, but we have decent coffee and sandwiches in the staff room." He followed her without argument, which told her more about his exhaustion than words could. The break room was empty, everyone else still dealing with the crisis. Bethany found herself making coffee and unwrapping sandwiches for a billionaire at 3 a.m., and somehow it felt perfectly natural. "Why are you really here?" she asked as she handed him a cup. "The truth, please. I've had enough PR speaks from hospital administrators to last a lifetime." Dale stared into his coffee for a long moment. "I couldn't sleep," he finally said. "Had a difficult evening. Saw the news about the accident. Thought maybe I could be useful here instead of staring at my ceiling." With an injured hand and wearing what looks like a $4,000 suit. $5,000, he corrected with a hint of a smile. "And the hand, that's part of the difficult evening." Bethany sat across from him, noting the way he cradled the cup, the slight tremor in his fingers. "You're shaking. When did you last sleep?" "Sleep is overrated," he murmured, but his eyes met hers, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with something she couldn't name. "You're supposed to be asking why the cold-hearted CEO is sitting in a hospital at 3 a.m. telling stories to sick kids." "No," Bethany said softly. "I'm not asking that at all. I can see why you're here. Same reason I am. Sometimes the only way to heal yourself is to help heal others." Dale's cup froze halfway to his lips. For a moment, he looked utterly exposed, as if she'd read something in his soul he thought he'd hidden completely. "How did you—" "15 years of pediatric nursing," she said. "You learn to read people, their pain, their fears, their hopes." She gestured to his bandaged hand, their wounds, both visible and hidden. A child's cry echoed from somewhere in the unit. Both of them tensed, ready to move, and their eyes met in shared understanding. "I should go," Dale said, standing. "Thank you for the coffee." "And for—" "Not asking," Bethany suggested. "Seeing," he corrected quietly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out one last stuffed dragon, placing it on the break room table. "For your next patient who needs a friend." Their fingers brushed as he set down the toy, and Bethany felt something like electricity spark between them. Dale's eyes widened slightly, telling her he'd felt it too. "Ms. Sweet ... "Bethany," she corrected. "Bethany," he said, her name somehow sounding different in his voice. "Would you—" Another cry interrupted them, this one more urgent. Bethany was moving before she could think, her body responding to the sound of a child in distress. But at the door, she turned back. "I'm here every night this week," she said, surprising herself. "The coffee's always terrible, but the company tonight wasn't bad at all." Dale's smile transformed his entire face, erasing the corporate mask she knew from magazines, revealing something warmer, more real. "I may have more stuffed animals to deliver," he said. "It could take several nights." Then they were both moving, pulled back into the chaos of the emergency department. But as Bethany worked through the rest of her shift, she found herself thinking of sad eyes and gentle hands, of dragons and courage, of wounds both visible and hidden. The resignation letter in her locker seemed to fade from importance with each passing hour. By the time dawn painted the Seattle sky in shades of hope, Bethany knew she wouldn't be delivering it. Some callings couldn't be walked away from, just as some connections couldn't be ignored. She didn't know then that her life had just changed irrevocably. She didn't know that the man with the sad eyes and expensive suit would rewrite her understanding of love and legacy. She didn't know that somewhere between midnight and dawn, between tragedy and hope, between coffee and stuffed dragons, she'd stumbled into the beginning of her own miracle. But she did know one thing. Tomorrow night, she'd make sure they had better coffee in the break room, just in case another sleepless billionaire needed a place to heal his hidden wounds. As she finally left the hospital, the morning sun warming her face, Bethany touched the stuffed dragon in her pocket. Sometimes the biggest miracles started with the smallest gestures. Sometimes healing began with a story about a dragon learning to fly, and sometimes, just sometimes, angels wore custom suits instead of scrubs. Chapter 3. Battlefield of Trust. The evidence wall in Bethany's apartment told two stories, the one she was investigating and the one breaking her heart. Premier Technologies' financials and incident reports created a complex web on her left wall, connected by red strings and sticky notes, but it was her right wall that haunted her. Candid photos of Dale reading to sick children, security footage of him delivering toys at midnight, newspaper clippings of his charity work that never made the front pages. Her HAP badge sat like an accusation on her desk as she stood in her date dress, still wearing the earrings Dale had sent that morning. The small box had arrived with a note. "These belonged to my mother. She wore them when she taught me that love is an action, not just a feeling. Will you wear them to dinner?" The earrings caught the light as Bethany traced a photo of Dale at a children's cancer ward. His public smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his face showed raw empathy as he held a crying child. Her fingers trembled as she touched the image. How could this man be the corporate villain she'd been sent to expose? Their first date had started as a tactical mission. Take him to dinner, gain his trust, find proof of corporate fraud. Instead, it had exploded into their first battle, not against each other, but for something bigger than both of them. $300,000 for a basic heart valve. Bethany had challenged over appetizers at Seattle's most exclusive restaurant. How do you justify that to families who can't afford it? Instead of defensive corporate speak, Dale had pulled out his laptop right there between the wine glasses. For 2 hours, he'd walked her through Premier's global initiative, how they used profits from wealthy markets to fund programs in developing countries. She'd watched him light up explaining how they'd revolutionized delivery systems in rural Africa, developed solar-powered diagnostic tools for remote clinics, trained local doctors in cutting-edge procedures. "The valve costs us $50,000 to make," he'd admitted. "We charge more in America so we can give them away in countries that can't afford them. Last year alone, we provided free cardiac care to over 10,000 children worldwide." Their argument had turned into a passionate discussion about healthcare ethics, global access, and the balance between profit and purpose. She'd left that night with her mission compromised and her heart traitorously intrigued. Their second date wasn't supposed to happen, but when a major snowstorm hit Seattle, trapping half her nursing staff at home, Dale had shown up at the hospital with his sleeves already rolled up. "I may run a company," he'd said, helping her change bedding in the pediatric ward, "but I still remember how to make a hospital corner. Mom made sure of that during her chemo days." She'd watched him that night, not as an investigator, but as a nurse. Watched how gentle his hands were with fragile patients, how he remembered every child's name, every parent's concern. How his corporate mask slipped when he thought no one was looking, revealing a deep well of carefully hidden pain. Now, standing in her apartment before their third date, Bethany faced her reflection in the window. The earrings Dale's mother had worn sparkled against her neck, beautiful and damning. On her desk, her latest report to HAP remained unfinished. Subject shows concerning patterns in testing protocols. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dale, just past the children's ward. Tommy asked me to tell you his heart feels super good today. His words, but I agree with the sentiment. My heart feels pretty super too, knowing I'll see you soon. Bethany sank into her chair, the weight of her dual life suddenly crushing. Every document she'd gathered showed suspicious patterns, but nothing concrete. Every lead she'd followed led to dead ends, or to more evidence of Dale's humanitarian work. It was like trying to prove darkness lived in the heart of light. A knock at her door made her jump. Dale was early. She quickly covered her evidence walls with the curtains she'd installed for this purpose, smoothed her dress, and opened the door. Dale stood there in a perfectly tailored suit, holding a small gift bag and wearing a smile that made her heart stutter. But it was his eyes that undid her, vulnerable, hopeful, carrying a warmth that no corporate CEO should possess. "I brought something for you," he said softly, "for when you have rough days at the hospital." Inside the bag was a teddy bear wearing scrubs, but it was what the bear held that made her throat tight. A miniature version of Where the Wild Things Are, Tommy's favorite book. "I had it custom-made," Dale explained, suddenly seeming nervous. "The bear's scrubs have your name, and the book. I thought maybe on hard days you could remember how your voice sounds reading it, how you make scared children feel safe just by being you." In that moment, Bethany's carefully constructed walls cracked. How could she investigate this man who noticed when she was tired during rounds, who remembered which children needed extra stories, who carried other people's pain so carefully while hiding his own? "Dale," she started, not sure if she was going to confess everything or run away. But then his phone rang, an emergency board meeting. Something about irregularities in the testing data. Her heart froze. This was what she'd been waiting for, wasn't it? Evidence of corporate wrongdoing. "I have to go," he said apologetically. "But dinner tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you, something I've been afraid to share." She nodded, watching him hurry away. As soon as he was gone, she plugged the drive containing her latest surveillance into her laptop. Boardroom cameras captured Dale pacing in his office, his hands shaking as he popped pills she recognized as anti-anxiety medication. His phone conversations revealed not corporate fraud, but desperate attempts to understand why test results weren't matching across facilities. "Run the tests again," he ordered his head of research. "Every protocol, every safeguard. These devices save lives. We can't risk any mistakes." Bethany's own hands shook as she added the footage to her evidence wall. But which wall did it belong on? The one documenting potential crimes, or the one showing a man whose integrity ran soul deep? Her HAP supervisor's words echoed in her mind. "Find the smoking gun, Bethany. Every corporation has its dark side, even ones run by men who read to sick children. But what if they were wrong? What if, in their determination to find corruption, they'd targeted the one CEO who valued lives over profits?" Her phone buzzed again, another text from Dale. "I'm sorry about tonight, but I need you to know something. Meeting you, it's made me believe in impossible things again, in hope, in trust, in the kind of love my mother said was worth fighting for." Bethany touched the earrings she wore, feeling their weight like truth against her skin. Tomorrow she would have to decide, her mission or her heart, the evidence she'd gathered or the evidence of her own eyes, the investigator's path or the harder road of trust. But tonight, in her apartment with its walls of contradiction, she allowed herself to feel the full complexity of loving someone she was meant to destroy. Because sometimes the greatest battles weren't fought with weapons or evidence or corporate power. Sometimes they were fought in the space between duty and desire, between facts and faith, between the head that knew to be cautious and the heart that recognized its own truth in another's eyes. And sometimes, just sometimes, love wasn't a battlefield at all. It was a surrender to something stronger than doubt, more powerful than fear, and more true than any evidence wall could ever capture. Chapter 4. The Night. Everything changed. The Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation Gala transformed the Grand Hyatt's ballroom into a garden of silver and blue lights. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic patterns across evening gowns and tuxedos, while ice sculptures of children playing sparkled like frozen dreams. At the center of it all, Bethany Sweet stood in a midnight blue gown that seemed to capture starlight, her heart pounding with the weight of the USB drive hidden in her clutch. 2 hours earlier, she'd discovered the truth. The evidence had been buried in encrypted files on Meridian Medical's servers, files that her HAP colleagues had finally cracked. Marcus Wellington hadn't just fabricated evidence against Premier Technologies. He'd orchestrated a years-long campaign to destroy Dale Boucher, starting with leaked medical records about Dale's infertility treatments. Now, watching Dale work the room in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, Bethany felt torn between urgency and heartbreak. He moved with practiced ease among Seattle's elite, but she could see the cost in the tension of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his champagne glass. Each smile looked more forced than the last. "Ms. Sweet." Marcus Wellington's voice behind her carried all the warmth of a snake's belly. "What a pleasure to see our favorite nurse supporting such a worthy cause." Bethany turned, her grip tightening on her clutch. Wellington wore his usual predatory smile, but there was something sharp in his eyes as they darted between her and Dale. "Mr. Wellington," she acknowledged coolly. "I wasn't aware Meridian Medical had been invited tonight." "Oh, we're everywhere these days." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rather like certain healthcare watchdog organizations. Don't you agree?" The threat in his words was unmistakable. Somehow he knew about HAP, about her investigation. The USB drive felt suddenly heavy, its contents burning with newfound urgency. "If you'll excuse me," Bethany began, but Wellington's hand shot out, gripping her arm with casual cruelty. "You know," he said conversationally, "it's fascinating how often Dale's companions turn out to be more than they appear. One might almost think he has a type, women who betray him. Let go of me." Bethany's voice was steel, matching the strength she'd learned in 15 years of handling hospital emergencies. "Bethany!" Dale's voice cut through the tension. He appeared at her side, his expression darkening as he saw Wellington's grip on her arm. "Take your hand off her, Marcus. Now." Wellington released her with exaggerated courtesy, but his smile had turned vicious. "Just having a friendly chat about loyalty, Dale. Something you should understand quite well by now." The orchestra struck up a new song, the opening notes of "The Way You Look Tonight" floating through the ballroom. Dale's hand found the small of Bethany's back, protective and gentle. "Dance with me?" he asked her, though his eyes never left Wellington's face. She nodded, letting him guide her to the dance floor. His touch was tentative, as if he feared she might shatter, or perhaps he was the one in danger of breaking. "Are you all right?" he murmured as they began to move with the music. "I need to tell you something," Bethany whispered back. "Something important. Not here. Somewhere private." Dale's steps faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "My office is 2 buildings over. We can take the private elevator." The song ended too quickly. They made their excuses to the hospital board members, Dale smoothly explaining that he needed to check some donor documents. No one questioned it. Dale Boucher's workaholic tendencies were legendary. The night air hit them like a shock as they crossed the sky bridge connecting the hotel to Premier's Tower. Seattle's lights sparkled below, a mirror of the stars above. Bethany's heels clicked against marble as they entered the executive elevator lobby. Dale pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner, and the elevator doors slid open silently. They stepped inside together, the air between them charged with unspoken words. "Dale," Bethany began as the elevator started to rise, "I haven't been completely honest with you." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I know." Before she could respond, the elevator lurched violently. Lights flickered, then died. Emergency lights cast everything in an eerie blue glow as the car ground to a halt between floors. "Perfect timing," Dale muttered, reaching for the emergency phone. Dead silence met his attempt. No signal on my cell either. Bethany checked her own phone. Nothing. They were suspended 30 stories up, cut off from the world, with only battery-powered lights between them and darkness. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. Dale loosened his bow tie, suddenly looking exhausted. "About Hap?" 3 weeks. About you being their investigator? 2 weeks. About Wellington's involvement, that I just figured out tonight watching him watch you. Why didn't you say anything?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Why didn't you?" "We've both been keeping secrets, Bethany. I just never expected mine to hurt quite this much." The pain in his voice cut through her defenses. She opened her clutch, removing the USB drive. "I found evidence tonight. Wellington fabricated everything. The patient complaints, the testing irregularities. It was all Meridian, not Premier. He's been systematically destroying evidence and planting false leads for years." Dale stared at the tiny drive as if it might bite him. "Why? Why help me now?" "Because I know you," Bethany said softly. "The real you, not the CEO in magazines or the target of my investigation. I know how you sing off-key to scared children, how you remember every nurse's birthday, how your hands shake when you think no one's watching, but you never let it stop you from holding a crying child." She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "I know how you kiss like you're afraid of breaking something precious. How you look at families in the pediatric ward with such longing it hurts to watch. How you build empires but still carry stuffed animals in your car just in case a child needs comfort." Dale's breath caught. In the blue emergency light, she could see tears in his eyes. "You weren't supposed to be real," he whispered. "After Julia died, I swore I'd never trust anyone again." "Julia? My wife. Former wife. She was Wellington's sister." The words seemed to cost him physical pain. "She married me when Premier was just starting, filed for divorce the day after we got the first major FDA approval, called my infertility a convenient business liability. She'd been feeding information to Marcus the entire time." Understanding dawned like a bitter sunrise. "That's why Wellington's attacks got so personal. He had inside information about your medical history." Dale leaned back against the elevator wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor, his perfect tuxedo wrinkled, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "I thought I was protecting myself, keeping people at a distance. Then you walked into my life with your terrible coffee and beautiful heart, and suddenly all my walls meant nothing." Bethany sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, but not touching. "I took this assignment because I believed corporations were putting profits over patients. I lost my parents to medical negligence, watching them die because some company decided their treatment was too expensive. It broke something in me. I swore I'd never let it happen to anyone else." "I remember the first time I saw you in the hospital," Dale said softly. "You were singing to that little boy with the collapsed lung. Your voice wasn't particularly good." She laughed despite herself. "Thanks a lot. But it was real," he continued. "Everything about you was real. The way you cared, the way you fought for your patients, the way you challenged me about healthcare costs on our first date. I kept waiting to find the agenda, the angle, the betrayal. Instead, I found you. Bethany's hand found his in the dim light. I kept waiting to find evidence that you were the villain in my story. Instead, I found a man who loses sleep worrying about sick children, who builds hospitals in countries that can't afford them, who carries wounds so deep he thinks he has to hide them from the world. Dale's fingers interlaced with hers. I have panic attacks, he admitted quietly. Started after Julia left. The board doesn't know. No one knows. Except you. You noticed in that board meeting last week, didn't you? When you suggested we take a coffee break right as it was starting. Your left hand always shakes first, Bethany said. And you get a certain look in your eyes, like you're drowning but trying to pretend you can breathe underwater. How do you see me so clearly? The same way you see me. She turned to face him fully. I was going to resign from HAP tonight. Before I found the evidence, I chose you weeks ago, Dale. The truth just gave me a better way to protect you. He reached up with his free hand, cupping her face. I should be angry. I should feel betrayed. Instead, I just feel free, she finished for him. Their lips met in the blue darkness, but this kiss was different from all the others. This was truth meeting truth, broken pieces fitting together. Two souls, recognizing their matching scars. Dale's hands trembled as they tangled in her hair, but Bethany just held him closer, letting him feel that she was real, that she wasn't leaving, that some things were worth the risk of trust. The elevator lights flickered back to life, but they barely noticed. In that suspended moment between earth and sky, something fundamental had shifted. All their carefully constructed walls had crumbled, leaving only the raw, beautiful truth of two people who had found home in each other's broken places. Later, they would face Wellington's schemes together. Later, they would build something extraordinary from the ashes of their secrets. Later, they would learn that their biggest miracle was still waiting to surprise them. But in that moment, in an elevator caught between floors, they discovered that sometimes the greatest power isn't in keeping secrets. It's in finding someone strong enough to help you carry their weight. And sometimes love isn't about being perfect. It's about being perfectly honest about your imperfections. The night had changed everything. But then again, maybe everything had been changing since the moment a tired nurse and a lonely CEO found each other in a hospital at 3 a.m., both thinking they were broken beyond repair, both about to discover that the best love stories start with two people brave enough to let their guards down and their hearts open, even if it takes a stuck elevator to make it happen. Chapter 5. Storm Warnings. The pregnancy test sat on Bethany's bathroom counter like a live grenade. 3 minutes had never felt so long. Outside, Seattle's infamous rain pelted her apartment windows, providing a drumbeat to her racing thoughts. 2 weeks of morning sickness she'd attributed to stress. The unexpected dizziness during hospital rounds. The strange cravings for foods she normally hated. Her phone buzzed. Dale was on his way over. She'd called him in a panic after nearly fainting during her shift, and he'd immediately left a board meeting. That was 20 minutes ago. Now, staring at the plastic stick that could change everything, she wondered if she should have waited to tell him. The timer on her phone chimed just as thunder cracked overhead. With trembling hands, she picked up the test. Positive. The world tilted sideways. She grabbed the counter for support, her mind racing through impossibilities. Dale's infertility wasn't just a medical fact. It had been confirmed by multiple specialists over years of testing. The most recent doctor had been brutally clear: the chance of natural conception is effectively 0. Yet here she was, staring at 2 pink lines that defied medical science. A knock at her door made her jump. She quickly hid the test in her pocket and went to let Dale in. He stood in her doorway, his suit slightly damp from the rain, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately, stepping inside and cupping her face in his hands. "Jennifer said you looked pale at the hospital. Have you seen a doctor?" Bethany leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. "I need to show you something," she whispered. "But you should sit down first." Dale's expression shifted from concern to worry. "Bethany, what's wrong?" Instead of answering, she led him to her couch and pulled the pregnancy test from her pocket. For a moment he just stared at it, uncomprehending. Then his face went completely white. But that's not possible," he whispered. "The doctors said—" "I know." Bethany sat beside him, taking his trembling hand. "I took 3 tests, all positive." Dale's breathing became shallow, and she recognized the signs of an impending panic attack. Quickly, she knelt in front of him, taking both his hands. "Breathe with me," she instructed softly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Stay with me, love." Gradually his breathing steadied, but his hands still shook in hers. "How?" he managed finally. "I don't know," Bethany admitted. "But I made an appointment with Dr. Sarah Mitchell for tomorrow morning. She's the best reproductive specialist in the city." "I remember her," Dale said quietly. "She was the one who told me—" His voice cracked. "She was kind about it, but very clear. The damage from my childhood illness, combined with the experimental treatments, she said a natural pregnancy would be statistically impossible." Thunder rumbled again, closer this time. The storm was intensifying, matching the turbulent emotions in the room. "Will you come with me tomorrow?" Bethany asked softly. Dale pulled her up onto the couch beside him, wrapping her in his arms. "Try to stop me," he murmured into her hair. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the storm and holding each other. Eventually, Dale's hand drifted to her stomach, resting there with a touch so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. "If this is real," he whispered, "if this is actually happening... It's terrifying," Bethany finished for him. "And wonderful," he added, "and impossible, and perfect." The next morning dawned grey and cold. Dr. Mitchell's office was on the top floor of Seattle's most prestigious medical building, with views of the Space Needle that neither of them noticed. They were too focused on the ultrasound screen, where Dr. Mitchell was frowning in concentration. "This is—" she began, then stopped, adjusting something on the machine. "What's wrong?" Dale's grip on Bethany's hand tightened. Dr. Mitchell turned to them with an expression of complete amazement. "Nothing's wrong, but I'm seeing something extraordinary. There aren't just 2 heartbeats." "Twins," Bethany whispered. "No." Dr. Mitchell turned the screen toward them. "Quadruplets, 2 sets of identical twins, all with strong heartbeats." The room seemed to spin. Dale sat down hard in the nearest chair, while Bethany stared at the screen in shock. That's impossible," Dale managed finally. "Apparently not." Dr. Mitchell's voice was gentle, but excited. "Mr. Boucher, given your medical history, this is unprecedented. The odds against natural conception were astronomical. The odds against quadruplets, especially 2 sets of identical twins. I've never seen anything like this in my entire career." She spent the next hour walking them through what this meant. High-risk pregnancy, constant monitoring, possible bed rest, the risks and challenges ahead of them. But Dale and Bethany were only half listening. Their eyes kept returning to the screen, to the 4 tiny heartbeats that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. They were so absorbed in their miracle that they didn't notice Dr. Mitchell's assistant stepping out to take a phone call, didn't realize that news this extraordinary couldn't stay secret for long. The storm broke as they left the medical building. Dale was already on the phone with his legal team, setting up trust funds, arranging for the best maternal fetal medicine specialists. Bethany was texting her supervisor at the hospital, requesting a meeting to discuss adjusting her schedule. Neither of them saw the photographer hiding behind a newspaper stand. Neither of them noticed the man in the grey suit who'd been watching Dr. Mitchell's office all morning. The first headline hit social media within hours. Miracle or manipulation? Premier tech CEO's impossible pregnancy raises questions. Dale saw it first, during a meeting with his executive team. His phone had been buzzing continuously with notifications, but he'd ignored them until Jennifer, his PR director, burst into the room, looking pale. "Dale, you need to see this, now." The article was brutal. Someone had leaked Dale's complete medical history, including details of experimental fertility treatments he'd investigated years ago. Wellington's fingerprints were all over it, though proving that would be nearly impossible. The implications were clear. Premier Technologies had used its CEO as a test subject for unauthorized fertility treatments, raising questions about the company's ethical standards and research protocols. Dale's phone rang. Bethany. "Turn on the news," she said without preamble. Her voice was shaking. He grabbed the remote for his office TV just in time to see Marcus Wellington being interviewed outside Meridian Medical's headquarters. "These allegations are deeply concerning," Wellington was saying, his face a mask of false concern. "If Premier Technologies is conducting unauthorized human trials, especially on its own CEO, one has to wonder what other ethical lines they're willing to cross. The FDA should investigate immediately." The camera cut to shots of Dale and Bethany leaving Dr. Mitchell's office that morning, then to carefully selected clips from Dale's past interviews about Premier's research division. Out of context, perfectly edited to sound sinister. "I'm coming to get you," Dale told Bethany, already grabbing his coat. "Pack a bag. We're going somewhere safe until we can contain this." "No." Bethany's voice was stronger now. "We're not running. I have evidence, remember? Everything Wellington's done, every lie he's told, it's all documented. We fight back, today." Dale stopped, his coat half on. "Bethany, the stress, the babies." "We'll be fine," she said firmly, "because their father is going to show the world what real integrity looks like, and their mother is done watching bad men hurt good people." In that moment, Dale fell in love with her all over again. "Where do we start?" "Call a press conference," Bethany said. "I'll bring the evidence. It's time to show Wellington that some miracles don't need scientific explanation. They just need truth and courage." Thunder rolled outside Dale's office window, but this time it felt less like a warning and more like applause. The storm was here, but they would weather it together, because some things were worth fighting for. And a love strong enough to create impossible miracles was definitely one of them. What they didn't know yet was that their biggest battle was still ahead. But for now, they had each other, 4 tiny heartbeats, and the kind of truth that could weather any storm. Wellington had declared war on their miracle, but he was about to learn that some things were beyond the reach of corporate warfare. Some things were simply meant to be. And sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness isn't money or influence or carefully crafted lies. Sometimes it's just love. Pure, impossible, miracle-making love. The kind that creates life where science says it can't exist. The kind that turns enemies into dust and transforms ordinary moments into magic. The kind that writes its own rules and defies every rational explanation. The kind that was growing inside Bethany, 4 tiny proofs that the heart knows things logic can never understand. The storm was just beginning, but so was their greatest adventure, and they were ready for both. Chapter 6. Love's Testimony. The Premier Technologies press room had never been so crowded. Journalists packed every seat, with more standing along the walls. their cameras and phones creating a forest of electronic eyes. The air hummed with speculation. Why had Dale Boucher called an emergency press conference? Was he stepping down? Would he address the brewing scandal about unauthorized fertility treatments? Behind the stage, Bethany stood in front of a mirror, smoothing her navy dress over her still flat stomach. The evidence was loaded on a secure tablet, triple-checked and backed up. Her HP badge sat heavy in her pocket, a reminder of everything she was about to risk. "Are you sure about this?" Dale asked softly, appearing behind her. He looked exhausted, but determined in his charcoal suit, the one she'd once teased him about being his battle armor. "No," Bethany admitted, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "But I'm sure about you, about us, about them." Her hand drifted to her stomach, where their 4 impossible miracles grew stronger each day. Dale's arms slipped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Whatever happens out there, know that you've already given me more than I ever dreamed possible." "Save the sweet talk for after I blow up my career," she teased, but her voice wavered. "Your career will be fine," he promised. "I've already had offers from 3 research hospitals wanting to study our case. They're more interested in the medical miracle than the corporate warfare." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jennifer, Dale's PR director, poked her head in. "They're ready, and Wellington just arrived with his legal team." "Perfect," Bethany smiled, but it was a predator's smile. Let's give him a front-row seat to his own downfall. The lights were blinding as they walked onto the stage. Dale took his usual place at the podium, while Bethany sat in a chair to his right, her tablet ready in her lap. She could see Wellington in the front row, looking smugly confident. "Thank you all for coming," Dale began, his voice steady. "Before we address the recent allegations about Premier Technologies' research protocols, there's something else we need to discuss, a truth that's been hidden for too long." He turned to Bethany, extending his hand. She rose and joined him at the podium, her heart pounding but her spine steel straight. "My name is Bethany Sweet," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "For the past 6 months, I've been working undercover for the Healthcare Accountability Project, investigating allegations of corporate fraud at Premier Technologies." The room erupted in gasps and camera clicks. Wellington's smirk grew wider, until Bethany continued. "What I found wasn't what anyone expected. The fraud existed, but not at Premier. The evidence led somewhere else entirely." She picked up her tablet, and the screen behind her came to life with documents, emails, and financial records. "It led to Meridian Medical and Marcus Wellington." The smirk vanished from Wellington's face as Bethany methodically laid out her case. The falsified test results, the doctored patient complaints, the systematic campaign to destroy Premier's reputation. "But the most damaging evidence," Bethany continued, her voice growing harder, "was personal. Mr. Wellington didn't just attack Premier Technologies. He used private medical information about Dale Boucher's infertility treatments to orchestrate a smear campaign. Information he obtained illegally through his sister's marriage to Dale years ago." Wellington stood abruptly, his face mottled with rage. "This is slander. You have no proof." "Actually," Dale cut in smoothly, "we have your own emails." He nodded to Jennifer, who clicked to the next slide. Wellington's private correspondence filled the screen, including messages about using Dale's medical history as leverage. "You didn't count on one thing, Marcus," Dale said quietly. "You didn't count on love being stronger than hate." Bethany took over again, her voice steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "I came to Premier looking for a villain. Instead, I found a man who spends his free evenings reading to sick children, who builds hospitals in countries that can't afford them, who carries the weight of 10,000 employees' livelihoods on his shoulders, but still notices when a nurse is having a bad day. She turned to face Dale fully now, speaking to him rather than the cameras. I found a man who taught me that true power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about lifting up those who need help. A man who made me believe in miracles long before we knew we were carrying 4 of them. The room went completely silent at that revelation. Even Wellington seemed stunned. Yes, Dale confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. We're expecting quadruplets, 2 sets of identical twins. Medically impossible, according to every specialist we've seen. But then again, the best kinds of love stories don't play by the rules. He faced the reporters, his hand finding Bethany's. Premier Technologies has never conducted unauthorized fertility treatments. Our miracle is exactly that, a miracle. One that proves that sometimes the heart knows things science can't explain. The Healthcare Accountability Project, Bethany added, has already forwarded all evidence of Meridian Medical's illegal activities to the SEC and FDA. Mr. Wellington, I believe there are some federal agents waiting to speak with you outside. As if on cue, 2 men in dark suits appeared at the press room doors. Wellington's face went from red to pale as he realized the game was truly over. You'll regret this, he snarled as the agents approached. Both of you. No, Marcus, Dale said calmly. The only regret here is that you never understood what real power looks like. It's not in destroying others. It's in being brave enough to love despite the risk of pain. It's in choosing truth over pride. It's in believing in impossible things and fighting for them with everything you have. The agents led Wellington away, but neither Dale nor Bethany watched him go. They were too busy looking at each other, seeing in each other's eyes the future they'd fought so hard to protect. The press conference dissolved into chaos as reporters shouted questions, but Dale and Bethany remained in their own world for a moment longer. I love you, he whispered just for her ears, every impossible bit of you. Even though I investigated you, she whispered back, especially because you investigated me. You saw all my flaws, all my battles, all my scars, and you chose to fight beside me anyway. The questions from reporters finally penetrated their bubble. Ms. Sweet, will you continue nursing? Mr. Bucci, how will this affect Premier's stock? Are you concerned about the high-risk nature of a quadruplet pregnancy? Dale raised their joined hands, silencing the room. We'll take questions about Premier's future and the legal proceedings against Meridian Medical. But our personal miracle, that's ours to cherish privately. Some things are too precious for public consumption. Hours later, after the last reporter had left and the evidence had been formally filed with every relevant authority, Dale and Bethany stood in his office watching the sunset paint Seattle in shades of gold. Was it worth it? He asked softly. Giving up your investigation career? Bethany smiled, guiding his hand to her stomach. I traded one type of investigation for another. Now we get to investigate how 4 tiny humans can make so much noise on an ultrasound, how 4 heartbeats can sound like a symphony, how love can create life where science says it can't exist. Speaking of investigations, Dale said, dropping to one knee, I'd like to investigate whether you'd consider making this miracle complete. He pulled out a ring, not a massive diamond as everyone would expect, but a delicate band with 4 tiny sapphires. One for each of our impossible dreams. Bethany's laugh was pure joy as she pulled him up. You're supposed to wait for the answer before you put the ring on my finger. I learned from the best investigator I know, he murmured against her lips. Sometimes you have to trust the evidence in front of you. The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger as the last rays of sun painted their world in gold. Below them, Seattle continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, but up here, in this moment, there was only light. Because sometimes the greatest testimony isn't spoken in courtrooms or press conferences. Sometimes it's written in heartbeats and hope, in courage and truth, in love that defies every logical explanation. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's written in the perfect way two broken people heal each other, creating miracles that science can't explain and love can't help but celebrate. The sun set on their day of truth, but their real story was just beginning. 4 tiny heartbeats strong and counting. Chapter 7. Unexpected Grace. The foster care record sat unopened on Dale's home office desk, a manila envelope containing the last traces of Bethany's twin sister's life. 3 weeks had passed since Wellington's arrest, and his final act of revenge had been to leave this envelope with Bethany's supervisor at the hospital. "Your sister wasn't the only one who died alone," the note had read. "Did you know she had a daughter? Another child lost in the system you abandoned." Bethany stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dale's penthouse, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other clutching a faded photograph of 2 identical little girls at a birthday party. She and her twin sister Sarah before the car accident that shattered their family, before Sarah ran away from their 3rd foster home, before Bethany channeled her pain into becoming a nurse, while her sister disappeared into Seattle's shadows. "We don't have to open it today," Dale said softly, coming to stand behind her. His reflection in the glass showed the worry lines around his eyes, concern for her, for their babies, for the weight of this new revelation. "Yes, we do." Bethany's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. "If I have a niece out there, alone in the system, I can't let another child go through what Sarah and I did." She turned from the window and walked to the desk, picking up the envelope. Inside were police reports, hospital records, and finally, a birth certificate. Sarah had named her daughter Chidi, a name from their Nigerian father's culture, meaning God's protection. "She's 13, Bethany whispered, tracing the date with her finger. "Sarah died when Chidi was only 6. Drug overdose in a shelter downtown." The pain in her voice was raw, decades of guilt and grief breaking free. "I should have looked harder for her. Should have known she was still in Seattle." Dale wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful of her growing belly. At 14 weeks, the quadruplets were making their presence known, turning simple movements into careful navigation. "We can't change the past," he murmured into her hair. "But we can change Chidi's future. If you want to find her, I'll move heaven and earth to make it happen." Bethany leaned back against him, drawing strength from his presence. "She's at Evergreen Group Home in Bellevue. According to these records, she's been through 4 foster homes in 7 years. The last note says she's resistant to placement and exhibits trust issues." "Wonder why?" Dale said dryly, his own childhood memories of loss coloring his voice. "When can we go see her?" Bethany turned in his arms, searching his face. "We? Dale, this isn't your responsibility. With the babies coming and Premier still recovering from the Wellington scandal." "Stop!" He pressed a finger to her lips. "First, nothing about you is a responsibility. You're a gift I thank God for every day. Second, those babies are miracles, but they're not the only kind of miracle worth fighting for. And third," he took a deep breath, "I know what it's like to be the kid that no one wants to deal with, the one with too many issues, too much baggage. If Chidi is family to you, she's family to me." Tears spilled down Bethany's cheeks as she kissed him fiercely. When they broke apart, she was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the social worker. Today. Now." 2 days later, they sat in a stark meeting room at Evergreen Group Home. The walls were painted an institutional beige, decorated with faded motivational posters. The social worker, Miss Chen, reviewed their paperwork with raised eyebrows. "You understand this won't be easy," she said, looking between them. "Chi has significant trust issues. She's intelligent, brilliant actually, especially in science, but she doesn't let people close. And with your high-risk pregnancy—" "I'm her aunt," Bethany interrupted firmly. "Her mother was my twin sister. I'm all the blood family she has left. And I'm a guy who knows something about losing parents too young," Dale added quietly. "We're not looking for easy. We're looking for family." Miss Chen studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "Wait here." The 10 minutes they waited felt like years. Bethany paced despite her doctor's orders to take it easy, while Dale sat perfectly still, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. When the door opened, they both froze. Chidi was tall for 13, with Bethany's high cheekbones and Sarah's defiant chin. She wore ripped jeans and a hoodie covered in hand-drawn chemical formulas. Her eyes, so like Sarah's it made Bethany's heart ache, swept the room with practiced wariness. "Chidi," Ms. Chen said gently. "This is your Aunt Bethany and her fiancé, Dale." The girl's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on her backpack straps. "I don't have an aunt." "Yes, you do." Bethany's voice cracked as she pulled out the old birthday photo. "This is your mum and me. We were twins. I lost track of her after we were separated in foster care. I didn't know about you until 2 days ago, or I would have come sooner. So much sooner." Chidi took the photo with trembling fingers. "Mum had this same picture," she whispered. "It burned in our last apartment." "I have more," Bethany said quickly. "Albums full, and stories. So many stories about your mom when we were kids, about your grandparents, about where your name comes from." "Why now?" Chidi's voice was sharp with years of protective anger. "Mom died 7 years ago. Where were you then?" "Fighting the wrong battles," Bethany admitted. "Trying to fix a broken healthcare system instead of fixing my broken family. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. But I'm here now, if you'll let me be." "We both are," Dale added softly. He hadn't moved from his chair, instinctively understanding that this skittish teenager needed space. "No pressure, no expectations. Just family if you want it." Chidi's eyes fixed on Bethany's slightly rounded belly. "You're pregnant." "Yes, quadruplets, if you can believe it. 2 sets of identical twins." Something flickered in Chidi's eyes. Interest, maybe even a hint of scientific curiosity. "That's statistically improbable. The odds of naturally occurring quadruplets with 2 sets of identical twins are approximately 1 in 70 million. Dale grinned. "She's right. Our doctors are writing papers about it." "You like science?" Bethany asked hopefully. Chidi shrugged, but her fingers traced one of the formulas on her hoodie. "Chemistry makes sense. Molecules don't lie or leave." The words hit like physical blows, but Bethany pushed through the pain. "No, they don't. But sometimes people who've left come back. Sometimes they bring physics-defying miracles and impossible hopes and promises they intend to keep." "Pretty words," Chidi muttered, but she hadn't let go of the photo. "Not words," Dale said quietly. "Actions. We've already started the paperwork to become certified foster parents. We bought the penthouse next door to expand our home. There's a room there if you want it. Paint it any color you like. Fill it with chemistry sets and books and whatever makes you feel safe. And if I don't want it, then we keep visiting if you'll let us," Bethany said firmly. "We keep showing up. We keep proving that not everyone leaves." Chidi stared out the window for a long moment. "The babies will come first," she said finally. "Everyone always has something that comes first." "No," Dale and Bethany said simultaneously. Dale leaned forward, his voice gentle but intense. "Family isn't a competition, Chidi. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies, like a chemical reaction creating something greater than its original components." A tiny smile flickered at the corner of Chidi's mouth. "That's not how chemical reactions work." "Teach me," Dale offered. "I know business and medical technology, but chemistry was never my strong suit." The smile grew slightly. "You'd let me teach you? I'd be honored. And maybe you could help us set up the nursery. 4 babies are going to need some serious organizational systems. 4 babies are going to need someone who knows how to calculate proper formula ratios and sterilization procedures," Chidi muttered, then looked startled, as if she hadn't meant to show that much interest. Bethany's heart soared, but she kept her voice casual. "That's true, especially since their mom is probably going to be on bed rest soon, and their dad can barely make coffee without breaking something." "Hey!" Dale protested, but his eyes were twinkling. For the first time, Chidi truly looked at them, not as threats or temporary fixtures, but as people. Can I think about it?" "Of course," Bethany said. "We'll come back tomorrow? Maybe bring lunch and those photo albums?" Chidi nodded slowly. "I have chemistry club until 3. "We'll come at 4, Dale promised. "Give you time to decompress after school." As they stood to leave, Chidi suddenly stepped forward and thrust the birthday photo at Bethany. "Keep it safe," she asked, her voice small. Just in case." Bethany understood what she couldn't say. "Keep it safe until I trust you enough to look at it again. Keep it safe until I believe you'll come back. Keep it safe until I'm ready to have a family again." "I will," she promised. "Everything precious deserves to be kept safe." Outside in their car, Bethany finally let the tears fall. Dale held her while she cried for Sarah, for Chidi, for all the years lost to fear and pain. "She's so much like both of us," she whispered. "Sarah's spirit, but my caution. Sarah's brilliance, but my walls. Sarah's spirit, but my caution. Sarah's brilliance, but my walls." "She's perfect," Dale said simply, "and she's ours, if she'll let herself be." 4 babies and a teenage genius? Bethany managed a watery laugh. "Are we crazy?" "Probably." Dale kissed her temple. "But the best kinds of love usually are. Now what do you say we go buy every chemistry set in Seattle?" "And books," Bethany added. "Did you see how worn her backpack was? She needs new everything." "Consider it done." Dale started the car, his expression determined. "Operation Win Over Our Daughter begins now." Bethany's heart skipped at his words. Our daughter. Yes, that felt right. Whether it took days or months or years, they would prove to Chidi that some families were worth trusting, some love was worth the risk. Because sometimes grace came packaged in unexpected ways, in quadruplets defying medical science, in teenage girls drawing chemical formulas on hoodies, in second chances disguised as manila envelopes. And sometimes, just sometimes, it came in the simple promise to keep showing up day after day, until trust could bloom in soil that had known too much drought. They had 4 miracles growing under Bethany's heart, but perhaps the biggest miracle of all was waiting in a group home in Bellevue, learning to believe that not all equations ended in loss, that some formulas, when mixed with love and patience and unwavering commitment, could create something as powerful as hope. Chapter 8. Family Forged in Fire. The hospital monitor's steady beeping was the only sound in room 742 of Seattle's Advanced Maternal Care Unit. Bethany lay still against white sheets, her growing belly monitored by a complex array of equipment. 22 weeks into her quadruplet pregnancy, complications had begun mounting faster than anyone had anticipated. Chidi sat in the corner armchair, her chemistry textbook open but untouched. Over the past month, she'd gradually moved from supervised visits to weekends at the penthouse, and finally, 3 days ago, to signing the foster placement papers. Now, watching machines track her aunt's vitals, she gripped a pencil so hard it nearly snapped. "Your molecular structure diagram is crooked," Bethany murmured, opening her eyes. Chidi looked down at her notebook, where she'd been unconsciously sketching chemical bonds. I haven't started the homework yet. I've been memorizing your medication schedule instead. Of course you have. Bethany's smile was tired but proud. What's the current count? 8 daily medications, 3 administered intravenously. The magnesium sulfate is running at 2 grams per hour to prevent preterm labor. Your blood pressure is hovering at 142/90, which is still higher than optimal, but better than yesterday. Chidi rattled off the statistics with practiced ease. Dr. Mitchell wants to start corticosteroids for the baby's lung development, but she's worried about how it might affect your blood pressure. Look at you, speaking medical terminology like a pro. Dale's voice came from the doorway. He carried 3 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like Chidi's favorite cinnamon rolls from the bakery down the street. The nurses have been teaching me, Chidi said, accepting a hot chocolate. She wasn't allowed coffee yet, despite her protests about the chemical benefits of caffeine. Melissa showed me how to read the fetal monitors. Each baby has their own distinct heart rate pattern. Did you know that? Dale settled into the chair beside Bethany's bed, taking her hand. I did not. Tell me more? A month ago, Chidi would have withdrawn at the invitation to share knowledge, too used to being dismissed as a know-it-all. Now, she set aside her textbook and moved closer to the monitors. See these 2 lines? Those are the identical twin girls. Their patterns are similar but not exactly the same. The boys' patterns are here and here. They're slightly faster on average. Melissa says it's normal for identical twins to have synchronized patterns. It's like they're already communicating. Just like their big sister, Bethany said softly, always keeping track of them. The word sister still made Chidi pause, but she didn't flinch away from it anymore. Instead, she reached out hesitantly and touched Bethany's belly where one of the babies was kicking. That's Maya, she said confidently. She's the most active between 10 a.m. and noon. I've been charting their movement patterns. Dale pulled a worn notebook from his briefcase, Chidi's pregnancy observations, filled with detailed notes and graphs, tracking everything from fetal movement to Bethany's vital signs. He'd had it bound in leather after finding Chidi asleep one night surrounded by loose papers covered in meticulous documentation. Have you updated the charts from last night? He asked, knowing how much she valued the responsibility. Chidi shook her head. I was waiting for the morning blood pressure reading, but I did start a new section on amniotic fluid levels. Dr. Mitchell said they're crucial indicators at this stage. The casual way she used medical terminology made Bethany's heart ache with pride and sadness. No 13-year-old should be so well-versed in pregnancy complications, but Chidi had thrown herself into understanding every aspect of the high-risk pregnancy, as if knowledge could somehow protect them all from loss. A sharp pain made Bethany gasp, her hand tightening on Dale's. Instantly, Chidi was checking monitors while Dale hit the call button. Contractions? Chidi asked professionally, though her hands trembled slightly. Just pressure, Bethany managed. The babies are getting crowded in there. Dr. Mitchell arrived before the conversation could continue. She reviewed the monitors with a frown that made Chidi step closer to Bethany's bed protectively. The contractions are getting more frequent, the doctor said finally. We need to increase the magnesium sulfate. Bethany, I'm putting you on complete bed rest. No sitting up except for absolutely necessary medical procedures. But that means she can't come to my science fair next week, Chidi blurted, then immediately looked embarrassed at revealing she'd been counting on their presence. Dale wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I'll be there. Front row, embarrassing proud dad signs and all. The babies are the priority, Chidi said quickly, but her disappointment was visible. No, Bethany said firmly, despite her discomfort. Dale's right. He'll be there with the signs, and I want every detail recorded in that notebook of yours, so you can tell me everything afterward. Speaking of details, Dr. Mitchell interjected gently. Chidi, Would you mind sharing your observations about the fetal movement patterns? The nurses mentioned you've been tracking them systematically. For the next 20 minutes, Chidi walked the doctor through her charts and graphs. Her scientific precision drew admiring comments from Dr. Mitchell, while her intimate knowledge of each baby's patterns revealed the depth of her emotional investment. "This is remarkable work, Doctor," Mitchell said finally. "Would you consider letting me share your documentation method with other families expecting multiples? Your system could help a lot of parents track their baby's development." Chidi's eyes widened. "Really? But I'm just a kid." "You're a scientist," Dale corrected. "Age is irrelevant to good research." The pride in his voice made Chidi stand straighter. "I could make it better," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe create an app with standardized input fields and automated pattern recognition." "After the science fair," Bethany reminded her with a smile. "One world-changing project at a time." Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Chidi was instantly back in caretaker mode, adjusting pillows and checking monitors, while Dale spoke quietly with Dr. Mitchell. "Mom." The word slipped out so softly that at first Bethany thought she'd imagined it. But Chidi was looking at her with worried eyes, one hand still resting on her belly where the babies kicked. "Should I get the nurse?" Bethany blinked back tears at the precious gift of that single word. "No, sweetheart. Just stay close." Chidi nodded, perching on the edge of the bed. "Always. Someone has to keep track of these troublemakers' vital signs." Dale returned to find his daughter teaching his fiancé the chemical structure of the medications keeping their babies safe, while said babies performed what felt like synchronized swimming. The scene was nothing like the family he'd imagined as a lonely CEO, and everything like the miracle he'd never dared to hope for. "Dad?" Chidi's voice broke into his thoughts. "Can you quiz me on the medication timing while I update the charts? Only if you help me practice my embarrassing science fair cheers afterward," he countered, pulling up a chair. Chidi rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "Fine, but no chemistry puns on the signs." "Too late," Bethany laughed. "He already ordered custom T-shirts that say, 'My daughter's science fair project has great chemistry.'" The look of mortified joy on Chidi's face was worth every contraction, every worry, every moment of fear. Because family wasn't just about blood or genetics or perfect circumstances. Sometimes it was about choosing each other every day, about turning medical crises into opportunities for connection, about letting love rewrite the equations of belonging until fear gave way to trust. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between monitor beeps and medication schedules, it was about watching a brilliant young girl learn that she didn't have to earn her place in their hearts. She already had it, permanently. No chemical bonds required. Chapter 9, Legacy of Love. The Premier Technologies boardroom buzzed with tension as Chidi stood at the podium, her presentation queued up on the massive screen behind her. At 13, she barely reached the microphone, but her spine was straight as she faced the row of executives and board members. 2 weeks of preparation had led to this moment. Dale sat at the head of the table, deliberately keeping his expression neutral despite his bursting pride. Beside him, Jennifer from PR kept shooting worried glances at the reporters gathered in the observation area. The story of Premier's miracle quadruplets had exploded beyond containment, with media outlets offering millions for exclusive rights. But today wasn't about the babies. Today was about their big sister and her vision. "Distinguished board members," Chidi began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "the Premier Technologies Fertility Research Center is an ambitious project, one that will help countless families achieve their dreams of parenthood. However, I believe we're missing a crucial opportunity to expand its impact." She clicked to her first slide, architectural renderings of a new wing. I propose the addition of the Premier Foster Youth Support Centre directly connected to the main facility. This wing would provide medical care, educational resources, and emotional support specifically tailored to children in the foster system. Murmurs rippled through the board members. This wasn't the presentation they'd expected from the CEO's foster daughter. They'd anticipated something safe, something symbolic, not a fully developed proposal that would require significant additional investment. The statistics are clear, Chidi continued, advancing to a series of graphs. Foster children face disproportionate medical challenges with limited access to consistent health care. By integrating foster youth services with our fertility center, we create a holistic approach to family building. Parents seeking fertility treatments will have direct exposure to adoption and fostering options, while foster children receive the specialized care they desperately need. She touched her tablet, and new images filled the screen, detailed floor plans, staffing requirements, budget projections. Weeks of late nights working with Dale had refined her initial concept into a viable business proposal. The cost analysis indicates an initial investment of $12 million for construction and first-year operations. Chidi's voice gained confidence as she moved into the financial details. However, through strategic partnerships with state agencies and private foundations, we can offset 60% of ongoing operational costs. More importantly, the social impact metrics suggest. "This is absurd," Gregory Matthews, one of the older board members, interrupted. "We're a medical technology company, not a social services agency. And with all due respect, you're a child." Dale started to speak, but Chidi was faster. "Yes, Mr. Matthews, I am a child. One who spent 7 years in the system you think isn't your concern." Her voice remained professional, but her eyes blazed. "Would you like to know what that taught me about business?" The boardroom fell silent. "It taught me that innovation without compassion is meaningless, that medical breakthroughs mean nothing if they're not accessible to those who need them most. And most importantly, it taught me that sometimes the best business decisions come from understanding human needs, not just market demands." She advanced to her next slide. A comparison of companies with strong social impact programs versus those without. Companies with integrated social responsibility initiatives showed 23% higher customer loyalty and 18% better talent retention. By combining our fertility expertise with foster youth support, we don't just help children. We create a unique market position that differentiates Premier from every other fertility center in the world. Dale watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to interest. His daughter, and his heart soared every time he thought that word, wasn't just pulling at heartstrings. She was speaking their language, showing them how doing good could also mean doing well. "The foster care system is broken," Chidi continued. "I know because I lived it. But Premier has a unique opportunity to create something revolutionary. Imagine prospective parents coming here not just for fertility treatments, but for comprehensive family-building support. Imagine foster children receiving world-class medical care while being exposed to positive adult role models in a professional environment." She clicked to her final slide, a rendering of the completed center at sunset, its windows glowing with warm light. This isn't just about adding a wing to a building. It's about expanding our definition of what family can mean. It's about creating a legacy that goes beyond medical breakthroughs to touch lives that might otherwise be forgotten. The room was absolutely silent when she finished. Even the reporters, had stopped taking notes, caught up in the power of her presentation. Finally, Catherine Chen, the board's senior member, spoke. "The financial projections seem solid, but the staffing requirements are intensive. How do you propose we handle specialized pediatric care alongside our fertility services?" Chidi smiled. "I'm glad you asked. She pulled up a new slide. "I've already discussed this with Dr. Mitchell. By integrating pediatric rotations from Seattle Children's Hospital, we create a training opportunity for medical residents while ensuring comprehensive care. Additionally, ... For the next hour, she fielded questions with a composure that made Dale's chest tight with emotion. Every challenge was met with carefully researched answers. Every concern was addressed with practical solutions. When the last question had been answered, Catherine Chen looked at Dale. "I move to approve the initial funding for feasibility studies and detailed architectural planning." "Seconded," came another voice, then another. The vote was unanimous. As the boardroom emptied, reporters clamoring for comments, Chidi finally allowed herself to relax. Dale pulled her into a fierce hug. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, meaning both Bethany and Sarah. "Do you think—" Chidi hesitated. "Do you think we can really help them? The other kids like me?" Dale looked at his daughter, this brilliant, wounded, healing girl who had turned her pain into purpose. "I think you already have. This center, this vision, it's going to change lives." "Speaking of changing lives," Jennifer interrupted apologetically, "Good Morning America wants an exclusive on the Quadruplets story. They're offering—" "No," Chidi said firmly. "Mom needs rest, not cameras. The baby's story is private. But—" she straightened her shoulders, "I'll do an interview about the foster care center, if that helps." Dale watched in amazement as his 13-year-old daughter calmly negotiated terms with his PR director. Gone was the withdrawn girl from the group home. In her place stood a young woman who had found her voice and her purpose. Later, in Bethany's hospital room, they celebrated with contraband chocolate cake while watching the local news coverage. "My brilliant girl," Bethany beamed as Chidi showed her the approved plans. "You're going to help so many children." "Our brilliant girl," Dale corrected, earning a smile from Chidi that lit up the room. The babies chose that moment to make their presence known, kicking in what felt like synchronized approval. Chidi immediately began documenting their movements in her ever-present notebook. "Maya started it," she noted professionally. "She always leads the dance party." As Dale watched his daughter record their miracle baby's movements while discussing architectural plans with Bethany, he marveled at how love could transform everything it touched. Wellington's last attempt at revenge, revealing Chidi's existence, had backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying their happiness, it had completed their family in ways none of them could have imagined. Because sometimes the greatest legacies aren't built with bricks and mortar, but with courage and compassion and the determination to turn pain into purpose. And sometimes, the most powerful force for change isn't money or influence or medical breakthroughs. It's the heart of a child who refuses to let others suffer as she did. It's the love of a family forged in fire and faith. It's the simple, world-changing truth that every life has value, every story matters, and every child deserves a chance to build their own legacy of love. Chapter 10. Final Battle. At 30 weeks, Bethany's body began to surrender. The monitors in her hospital room played a symphony of urgent alerts as her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. Dr. Mitchell had moved her to the ICU, where machines tracked every breath, every heartbeat, both hers and the baby's. Dale hadn't left the hospital in 3 days. He ran Premier Technologies from a makeshift office in the corner of Bethany's room, his empire managed between beeping monitors and whispered medical consultations. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his usual impeccable appearance replaced by wrinkled dress shirts and uncombed hair. Chidi had converted the ICU waiting room into a study hall, her textbooks spread across 3 chairs, while she alternated between homework and reviewing medical journals. She'd recruited a rotation of medical students to help her research similar cases, promising them recommendations from Dale in exchange for their expertise. "Her protein levels are rising again," Chidi announced quietly, studying the latest lab results. She'd learned to read medical charts faster than some residents, her scientific mind focused entirely on understanding her mother's condition. Dale looked up from his laptop, where he'd been on a video call with his board. "How bad?" "Bad enough that Dr. Mitchell ordered hourly monitoring." Chidi's voice was clinical, but her hands shook as she updated her charts. "The preeclampsia is getting worse." They both looked at Bethany, who lay still against white sheets, her skin almost as pale as the hospital linens. Medication kept her sedated to prevent seizures, but occasionally her fingers would twitch, searching for something or someone. "The babies are stable," Chidi continued, because focusing on data helped her stay strong. "Their heart rates are maintaining good variability. Maya's still the most active, but even she's quieter today. It's like they know to conserve their energy." Dale saved his work and closed his laptop, moving to sit beside his daughter. "What do your research students say?" Katie found 3 cases of successful quadruplet deliveries with severe preeclampsia, all between 30 and 32 weeks. James is reviewing a paper about new treatment protocols, and Michael, she hesitated. Michael is looking into survival rates. "Hey," Dale turned her chair to face him. "Your mum is the strongest person I know. And those babies? They're fighters, just like their big sister." Chidi's composure cracked slightly. "The statistics." "Sometimes love is stronger than statistics," Dale interrupted gently. "You taught me that." Before she could respond, one of the monitors began screaming. Bethany's blood pressure was climbing again, despite the medication dripping steadily into her IV. Medical staff flooded the room, their voices overlapping with urgent commands. Dale and Chidi were pushed toward the door, but not before they saw Bethany's body arch with a seizure. "No," Chidi whispered, her scientific detachment shattering. "Mom!" Dale held her back as doctors worked, his own heart threatening to stop at the sight of Bethany convulsing. Through the chaos, they heard Dr. Mitchell's voice. "We need to deliver. Now." "It's too early," Chidi protested. But her words were lost in the rush of activity as they prepared to move Bethany to surgery. Dr. Mitchell paused long enough to address them. "The babies have a better chance than their mother right now. We have to choose." Dale felt his world tilting sideways. "Save them," he managed. "Save all of them." "We'll try." Dr. Mitchell's eyes were kind but serious. "Chidi, I need your notes. All the research, all the cases you found, anything that might help." Chidi ran for her notebooks while Dale called their family lawyer. In minutes, papers were signed, giving him medical power of attorney. As they wheeled Bethany toward the operating room, he kissed her forehead. "Fight," he whispered. "Please, fight." The next hours were endless. Dale paced while Chidi read medical journals aloud, her voice growing hoarse as she searched for anything that might help. The waiting room filled with Premier Technologies employees, hospital staff who'd grown to love Bethany, and even some of Chidi's former foster care workers. "I should have seen it coming," Chidi said suddenly, her voice small. "The signs were there in her last labs. If I'd calculated the trends sooner." "Stop." Dale knelt in front of her chair. "You're 13. You've done more than most medical professionals. This isn't your fault." "I can't lose another mum," she whispered. "And the babies, they're too small. The survival rate at 30 weeks is high enough," Dale interrupted, "especially with the steroid shots we did last week. Remember what you told the board about how sometimes the best decisions come from understanding human needs?" Chidi nodded slightly. "Well, right now, those babies need their big sister to believe in them. And your mom needs you to keep being the brilliant scientist who's going to help other families avoid this in the future." Determination flickered in Chidi's eyes. She pulled out her tablet and began typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" "Designing a monitoring system," she said, her fingers flying over the screen. "Something that can track trends in lab values and vital signs, predict complications before they become critical. If I combine machine learning algorithms with the research parameters we've been studying..." Dale watched in amazement as his daughter channeled her fear into innovation. She worked furiously, pausing only to update her siblings' charts when nurses brought news from the operating room. Hours passed. Coffee cups accumulated. Chidi's project grew from a simple monitoring system to a comprehensive maternal health platform. Dale alternated between helping her refine the interface and praying harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. Finally, Dr. Mitchell appeared, looking exhausted but smiling. "They're all stable," she announced. "The babies are in the NICU, small but fighting, and Bethany..." She paused, her smile growing. "Bethany is asking for her family." The relief was so intense that Dale's legs nearly gave out. Chidi launched herself into his arms, her tablet clattering forgotten to the floor. "She's really okay?" Chidi asked, her voice breaking. "All of them?" "Come see for yourself," Dr. Mitchell said. "The nurses are already taking bets on which baby is going to be the first to break out of their incubator. Apparently, Maya's heart rate increases every time someone mentions her sister's name." They followed her through the quiet hospital corridors, first to the NICU, where 4 tiny miracles fought their first battle with their mother's determination. Then to recovery, where Bethany lay pale but alive, her smile tired but radiant. "My scientists," she whispered as they entered. "Did you solve all the world's medical problems while I was away?" "Just some of them," Chidi said, carefully hugging her. "I invented a new monitoring system, and I may have accidentally designed an app for tracking multiple birth pregnancies, and possibly reorganized the NICU protocols based on statistical analysis of outcome data." "Of course you did!" Bethany's laugh was weak but real. "And you?" she asked Dale. "I just loved you," he said simply. "All of you." "That's enough," Bethany murmured as her eyes drifted closed. "That's everything." They sat with her through the night, Chidi curled in the recliner while Dale held Bethany's hand. Every hour, nurses brought updates from the NICU. Every hour, their miracles grew stronger, and in the quiet moments between updates, Dale watched his daughter sleep and marveled at how love could transform fear into purpose, pain into innovation, and a broken family into something stronger than steel. Because sometimes the final battle isn't won with medicine or money or even science. Sometimes it's won with the quiet determination of a teenager who refuses to accept statistical probabilities. Sometimes it's won with the unwavering faith of a father who believes in impossible things. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's won with the combined strength of 6 hearts beating in perfect symphony, each one fighting not just for survival, but for the chance to be a family forged in fire, tested by fear, and made stronger by every battle they faced together. Chapter 11. Dawn's Promise. The first light of dawn painted Seattle's skyline in shades of pearl and gold as Bethany's eyes fluttered open. The world came back to her in pieces, the steady beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell of hospital air, and the warm weight of her family asleep across her bed. Dale sat slumped in the bedside chair, his hand still holding hers even in sleep. His normally pristine appearance was delightfully disheveled, tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, stubble darkening his jaw. On her other side, Chidi had fallen asleep with her head resting on the edge of the mattress, one hand clutching her ever-present medical notebook. But it was what Chidi had written on the window that made Bethany's heart swell. In her precise handwriting, using the erasable markers from the nurse's station, she'd covered the glass with their family motto, "Love isn't about probability, it's about possibility." Below it she'd added, "Come on, Mum." 4 more miracles awaiting. Bethany's movement, slight as it was, made Dale stir. His eyes opened, immediately finding hers, and the love she saw there brought tears to her eyes. "Hey, beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Hey yourself," she managed, her throat dry. "You look terrible." His laugh, though quiet, made Chidi lift her head. For a moment, she just stared at Bethany, her scientific composure cracking to reveal the scared 13-year-old beneath. "Mom," the word was barely audible. "Come here, my brilliant girl," Bethany said, opening her arms despite the IV lines. Chidi moved carefully, mindful of the medical equipment as she curled against Bethany's side. "Your blood pressure is finally stable," she reported, because facts were her safety net. "The new medication protocol is working, and the babies are perfect," Dale finished. "Small but mighty, just like their big sister." Bethany touched Chidi's cheek, wiping away tears the teenager was trying to hide. "Tell me everything I missed, and don't skip the scientific details. I know you've probably revolutionized maternal health care while I was sleeping." Pride briefly overcame emotion in Chidi's eyes. "I designed a new monitoring system. The hospital's tech department is already reviewing it. And I organized all the research on quadruplet pregnancies with severe preeclampsia. There were only 14 documented cases worldwide, but I found patterns in the treatment protocols that could help future cases." "Of course you did," Bethany smiled, then noticed the dark circles under her daughter's eyes. "Have you slept at all?" "She power-napped between research sessions," Dale said, "and somehow managed to keep Premier running while I was falling apart. The board actually called her for advice yesterday. They just needed clarification on the foster care wing specifications," Chidi mumbled, but her cheeks flushed with pleasure. A nurse appeared with Bethany's morning medications, smiling at the family tableau. "Dr. Mitchell will be here soon for rounds, and the NICU sent new photos of the quads. Would you like to see?" "Please," Bethany breathed, and moments later she was looking at 4 tiny fighters in their incubators. Each baby had a handmade name card, decorated with chemical formulas. Chidi's work, obviously. "Maya's the strongest," Chidi reported, pointing to one of the photos. "She keeps setting off the monitors because she's too active. Mia's quieter, but her oxygen levels are perfect. The boys are exactly the same size. I've been tracking their measurements down to the millimeter." "Our little scientists in training," Dale chuckled. "Well, Mason definitely takes after Dad. He gets cranky during shift changes, just like you in board meetings." Chidi's teasing made Dale clutch his chest in mock offense. "And Marcus has Mum's steady heart rate, even during procedures." Bethany studied the photos, memorizing every tiny detail of her baby's faces. "They're so small," she whispered. "But fierce," Chidi assured her. "The NICU nurses say they've never seen preemie quads so determined." "Maya actually grabbed the doctor's finger yesterday. Her grip strength is already above average for her gestational age." "I need to see them." Bethany started to sit up, but both Dale and Chidi gently pressed her back. "Soon," Dale promised, "but you need to get stronger first. Doctor's orders." "And my orders," Chidi added firmly. "I've calculated the optimal recovery timeline based on your lab values and vital signs. If you follow the protocol exactly, you can visit the NICU in approximately 72 hours. Bethany couldn't help laughing at her daughter's serious expression. "Have you created a spreadsheet for my recovery too?" 3 spreadsheets, 2 monitoring charts, and a probability matrix for different rehabilitation scenarios, Chidi admitted. "The nurses helped." "Speaking of help," Dale interjected, "your fan club has taken over the waiting room. The entire pediatric nursing staff, half of Premier's executives, and I'm pretty sure the hospital board chairman has been sleeping in his office to stay close. And my research students brought more journals, Chidi added. We're expanding the literature review to include international cases. Did you know there's a fascinating study from Singapore about maternal fetal monitoring in multiple births? Bethany listened as her daughter excitedly explained the research, while Dale ordered breakfast and fielded messages from well-wishers. The sunrise painted her family in gentle light, transforming the sterile hospital room into something sacred. A soft knock interrupted Chidi's scientific discourse. Dr. Mitchell entered, beaming at seeing her patient awake and alert. "Someone's been asking for their mother," she said, wheeling in a tablet displaying a live feed from the NICU. "Ready to say good morning to your miracles?" The image showed all 4 babies, their tiny forms moving slightly in their incubators. As they watched, Maya kicked her foot, setting off a chain reaction as her siblings stirred in response. "They do that all the time," Chidi explained excitedly. "I've been documenting their synchronized movements. The statistical probability of such coordinated behavior at this developmental stage is incredibly low, but they consistently demonstrate." She stopped as Bethany pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Never change, my beautiful scientist." The baby's vital signs actually improve when Chidi reads to them, Dr. Mitchell shared. "She's been doing medical journal club in the NICU. I think we have 4 future doctors on our hands." "5," Dale corrected, squeezing Chidi's shoulder. "Our oldest is already revolutionizing maternal health care." Chidi ducked her head, but not before they saw her pleased smile. She turned back to the NICU feed, automatically checking the monitors visible in the background. "Everything looks perfect," she assured Bethany. "Their parameters are all within optimal ranges. Maya's being a show-off as usual. See how her heart rate elevates when she knows we're watching. And look, Mia's responding to her sister's activity. The boys are sleeping through it all, just like Dad in morning meetings." "I do not sleep in meetings," Dale protested. "Your quarterly projections presentation." Chidi raised an eyebrow. "I have photographic evidence." Their gentle bickering washed over Bethany like a healing balm. This was her family, brilliant, caring, slightly crazy, and absolutely perfect. They had faced impossible odds and emerged stronger. They had turned medical crisis into hope for future families. They had forged bonds that transcended blood and genetics and probability. The morning light strengthened, turning Chidi's window message into a glowing promise. Love isn't about probability, it's about possibility. And they were living proof that sometimes the most beautiful possibilities came disguised as statistical impossibilities. 4 tiny miracles in the NICU, 1 brilliant teenager who turned fear into scientific innovation, and 2 parents who had found each other against all odds. They were writing their own story, one that defied medical textbooks and exceeded every expectation. Dawn had never looked more promising. Chapter 12. Miracles Times 4. The delivery room at Seattle's finest hospital became holy ground on a rain-washed Tuesday morning. Prayer and science merged as machines tracked 4 tiny heartbeats and 1 mother's courage. Bethany lay still against white sheets, her face serene despite the controlled chaos around her. Dale stood at her head, one hand gripping hers, while the other smoothed back her hair. "They're ready, Doctor," Mitchell announced from behind her surgical mask. "Bethany, on the next contraction." Chidi watched from her carefully negotiated position near the monitors, wearing personalized scrubs with "Big Sister" embroidered over the heart. A gift from the hospital staff, who had come to love the teenage scientist, who could read medical charts faster than some residents. Her tablet was ready to document every moment, but for once, the scientist in her took a back seat to the daughter watching her family's miracle unfold. Maya announced her arrival with a cry that woke the entire floor. strong, demanding, unmistakably ready to take on the world. Just like in the ultrasounds, Chidi noted with tears in her eyes, always leading the way. Mia followed moments later, her tiny hand somehow finding her sisters in their first seconds of life. The gesture made even the most seasoned nurses pause in wonder. The sisters who had shared every moment of their journey weren't about to stop now. Mason and Marcus arrived together, their synchronized heartbeats never faltering through the whole process. Even as the doctors lifted them free, their vitals stayed perfectly matched on Chidi's beloved monitors. Dale sang through it all, terrible, beautiful, emotion-choked renditions of every love song he knew. The staff had indeed worn earplugs as rumored, but his voice carried more love than music anyway. Bethany's laugh sob at his off-key version of Sweet Child O' Mine was recorded for posterity in Chidi's meticulous notes. 10 fingers! Chidi called out as she helped the nurses count, her voice steady despite her tears. 10 toes, 100% perfect. When the last measurements were taken, the last tests completed, they wheeled 4 small incubators into position around Bethany's bed. Dale stood between his wife and their miracles, his hands shaking as he touched each tiny face. "Hello, my impossibilities," he whispered. Chidi moved between the incubators, adjusting monitors with practiced ease, while adding her own special touches. Tiny nameplates decorated with chemical formulas for love, courage, hope, and joy. Each baby had their elements carefully chosen based on their personalities in utero. "Maya's formula has the most reactive elements," she explained to the nurses, "while Mia's combines stability and grace. The boys share complementary electron patterns, just like their synchronized hearts." As dawn painted the hospital room in shades of gold, the new family of 7 came together in a moment that defied every medical probability. Maya, living up to her formula, had already tried to grab 3 different medical instruments. Mia watched the world with her mother's thoughtful eyes. Mason and Marcus dozed in perfect synchronization, their tiny chests rising and falling in harmony. And Chidi, the sister who had helped guide them into the world, stood guard over her siblings with a fierce love that had nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with destiny. "They're all fighters," Dr. Mitchell declared, checking vital signs one last time. 4 perfect miracles. 5 miracles, Dale corrected, pulling Chidi into a hug. "And 1 extraordinary mother who made impossible things possible." Bethany reached for her oldest daughter's hand. "Read to them," she asked softly. "They know your voice." Chidi pulled out the book she'd chosen months ago. Not a fairy tale or a lullaby, but A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. "Because even the smallest particles in the universe are part of something magnificent," she explained as she began to read. The babies settled at the sound of her voice, even Maya pausing her explorations to listen. Physics and philosophy filled the room as morning light wrapped them all in a gentle glow. Love, like quantum mechanics, followed its own rules. It expanded beyond the boundaries of logic, defied the laws of probability, and turned ordinary moments into miracles. Their family had been forged in fire, tested by fear, and strengthened by every challenge they faced. Now, as 4 new heartbeats joined their symphony of love, they knew that some equations couldn't be solved with science alone. Sometimes the answer wasn't in the statistics or the medical journals or even the chemical formulas that Chidi loved to balance. Sometimes it was in the way a teenage girl could heal from abandonment by becoming the fiercest protector of others. Sometimes it was in the way a man who thought he couldn't have children could become the father of 5 miracles. Sometimes it was in the way a nurse's compassion could transform not just lives, but entire healthcare systems. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was in the simple truth that love, like science, began with believing in impossible things. As morning light filled the room, Chidi paused in her reading to wipe away tears. The babies had drifted to sleep, but their monitors showed they were still listening, their vital signs synchronized to the cadence of their sister's voice. Dale held Bethany's hand while she rested, his eyes moving from one miracle to the next, memorizing every perfect detail of this moment. And somewhere, in the vast universe that Chidi was reading about, stars aligned and atoms danced, and love proved, once again, that the most powerful force in existence wasn't gravity or electromagnetic energy, or even the strong nuclear force that held atoms together. It was the simple, world-changing power of hearts that chose to beat as one. 5 miracles in a hospital room, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary stories began with ordinary people who dared to believe in impossible things. And as Seattle's rain turned to sunshine, their story became part of the greater cosmic dance, a reminder that in a universe of infinite possibilities, love was the most miraculous equation of all. Don't forget to subscribe.